Alright, another lyrical ride line with the Dokuvan stream. This time, the Siana ride line, so let's begin. But first, cards for the last few days. So we start with a double rare, Decorate Shiny Hearse, which is a grade 3 with taking power and the skills. Although when placed on rearguard from hand, if your Vanguard is Lefa, choose up to one grade 2 or greater unit with a different name from this unit from your hand and call it to a back row rearguard, and it gets the boost ability. And then, depending on the timing you call it, it gets one of the following. During the main phase, draw a card. If it's during battle, plus 10k power. Superior call a 10k booster, not too bad, and plus another 10k on top. And remember, Lilfa's playstyle is to have your whole entire back row with grade 2 or higher units. And there's also ways to do it during battle, so regardless, you can actually activate both of them, not too hard. Next, Starry Witchcraft Roseanne. Grade 3, 30 power and the skills. Auto rearguard. When this card attacks a grade 3 or greater Vanguard, cost, put a card from your hand to soul, look at top 2 cards of your deck, choose a card from among them and put it to your hand, put the other to the bottom of the deck. I mean, it's practically free choice soul charging while also being able to replace your card from your hand. So I guess you could run it if you have room for it, but for the most part you don't. But run it in your own leisure if you want. And now to the stream itself with the Siana ride line. Here's the starter. Make sure warm up exercise is done Siana. Now this one's kind of funny. In which we go to relying on snakes when lost Siana, which is the grade 1 wiki power with the skill of Auto Vanguard. At the end of battle that this unit attacked by a rear guard, if no cards were put to the Guardian during that battle, your opponent chooses a card from their hand and discard it. If they did not discard a card, bind the rearguard that it attacked. Basically, Siana's playstyle is to be very tricky with your opponent whether they want to do certain things or not. In this case right now is whether to make your opponent want to attack you early or not. But anyway, second skill. Auto, when rolled upon by a grade 2 Siana, cost Soul Blast 1, draw a card. Your opponent returns all the front row rearguards back to the hand. Overall, not too bad. It can make your opponent think about whether to rush you in early game and also lets you draw it with the extra bonus. For the grade 2 with 10k power, perfectly prepared to deal with the heat Siana, which has the skill of Auto Vanguard. At the end of battle that this unit is attacked by a rearguard, if no cards were put on Guardian during that battle, your opponent chooses a card from the hand and discard it. If they don't discard, bind that attacking rearguard. Once again, being tricky with your opponent. And then second skill, Auto, when rolled upon by a grade 3 Siana, choose a trigger unit or blitz order from your drop zone and add it to your hand. Yes, you heard that right, blitz order. So meaning this deck can be very tricky in its defensive style as well. Which now we go to the grade 3 Working Power Gorgon Eye Siana, which has the skill of Count Vanguard. If your opponent has 2 or less front row rearguards or Guardian, crit +1, drive +1. And as you can tell from its playstyle, obviously there are ways to do it. And then second skill, Auto Vanguard. When this card attacks, cost, put a trigger unit from your hand to soul, and this card gives us 15k power at the end of battle. Remember, this is a very tricky playstyle when it comes to defensive, so choosing a guard or not, your opponent's gonna minus something. Either you don't take the damage or they lose something. But the third skill, Auto Vanguard. At the end of battle that this unit attacked, if no cards were put to a Guardian for that battle, your opponent chooses a card from their hand, discard it. If they don't discard, bind that attacking rearguard. Yep, very tricky. If your opponent chooses to attack and not to minus their hand and minuses their rearguard instead, which is more likely, you're going to get extra pluses. And you can get further plussing in a way by losing trigger from your hand, because that's going to still be a tricky mark right there. Because whether you choose to guard or not, your opponent can lose something or you take no damage. Now obviously once you hit your 5th damage, it might be a little difficult for you, but I really like how the tricky style of this deck. Just basically playing around with your opponent whether they should attack you or not. And into the support cards, our first card is This Is Like Utopia Norchi, which is a grade 3 with 13 power and the skill is Auto Rearguard. When this card attacks a Vanguard, if your Vanguard is at least a grade 3 Siana, cost Soul Blast 1, return all your opponent's front row rearguards to the hand, and this unit gets us 5k power. AKA clearing up your opponent's front row so you get the extra 5k and 1 crit. So even if you do not get hit, you can use this instead. Must be played in the deck. Next, Wonderful One Lupoa, which is a grade 1 with K power and the skill is Auto. When placed on rearguard, choose one of your opponent's front row rearguards and bounce it back to the hand. Once again, bouncing, which of course you want to clear up the front row anyway. In which we go to the second skill where Auto Rearguard. When your grade 3 or greater Vanguard Siana is being attacked or attacks, cost, put this card to soul, choose one of your Vanguards to give us 10k power to end that battle. It's nice that this can interact with both players' turns, because Siana, you can see that you have to give up a trigger for extra power just to trick your opponent. But the nice part is that if you use this card's skill to give the extra 10k power on your opponent's turn, you're not putting anything to the Guardian. So you can actually play defensive with this card without putting stuff to the Guardian. And for not doing so, well, your opponent loses the rearguard. So this is definitely a good card for the deck. And we have Lavish Runner Juno, which is a grade 2 with taking part in the skills Act Rear Guard once per turn. If you have a grade 3 Siana, cost Soul Blast 1, choose one of your opponent's front row rear guards and put it back to your hand. If you Soul Blasted a trigger, choose one of your Vanguards that gets what's 10k power in turn. Your Vanguard already puts the trigger in your soul, so that part shouldn't be too hard. But the bouncing part is pretty nice and it's an act. So this is overall just pretty decent for the deck as well. Finally, Jackal Parade Turridius, which is a grade 2 with taking part in the skills. Auto, when placed on rear guard, choose one of your opponent's front row rear guards and put it back to the hand. Once again, just to clear up your opponent's front row so you can get the extra 5k on 1 crit. But the second skill, Auto Rear Guard, when this card attacks a Vanguard, if your Vanguard is Siana, cost combat 1, this card gets plus 5k power to the end of the battle for each of your opponent's front row rear guards. If it's 10k or more, draw a card. As you can see, clearing up your opponent's front row is pretty easy, and having that tricky playstyle whether to make your opponent lose hand or the rear guard is also there as well, so that extra draw is actually easily triggerable. But once again, just clearing up your opponent's front row. And then before we leave, for the triple drive booster, we got a Dragon Empire ride line, which seems to be a Tachikaze theme by the way, without the military weapons. So that's it for the new Siana ride line. What do you guys think of it? Honestly, I think it's a very interesting playstyle, being very tricky with your opponent actually. Your opponent decides to do something, they can lose something from it. If your opponent decides not to do something, they can still lose something from it. Most of the time, your opponent will decide to lose what they have in the front row rear guard so you don't get the extra stuff. But if you can't take it anymore, you have a backup plan. I just kind of like how tricky this can play with your opponent. Other than that, it's not the best playstyle, but I sort of like it. But other than that, that's it for this, and see you all next time.